No. Hello, fáilte seo. It's just ag fanacht ar daoine teachtasteach, so we'll give it a few minutes while everybody's coming in, and then we'll get going, all right? Okay. All right, so fáilte roimh. Hello, everybody. Thanks very much for coming along to the event today. We're really proud to see so many of you here today to this event about the campaign in Britain to support Irish language rights in the North. My name's Seoladh, and I'm part of the committee at Acht Gaeilge, which is Liverpool's Irish Language Speaking Society. I want to do a wee bit of housekeeping just before we start and ask that everybody just keep themselves on mute. You should already be on mute since you came in, but if you will keep yourself on mute until the end of the event, where you'll have the opportunity to ask a few questions and share a few comments if you'd like. But feel free to use the chat to put in any questions or comments that you do have while our speakers are speaking. The event is going to be streamed live on our YouTube channel as well, so I've just hooked it up there. So just to be aware to turn your camera off if you don't want your image shared. So the event tonight has been put together by members of mBreatain, which is the new umbrella organisation that we're very excited about for all the Irish language groups in Britain, plus other groups who have a love and respect for the Irish language, like the family of Margaret Keane, who are with us this evening, and whose campaign experience from Message to Margaret has been vital in getting this campaign off the ground. So we're here tonight to launch a campaign that we're calling Tacaíocht, which in English means support for the Act. And the premise is to lend our support for the Irish Language Act in Northern Ireland, but from this side of the water here in Britain. So in a wee while, roimh is going to give you a better history than I can from Andram Jarrig's perspective. And he has much more knowledge than me of the toil that it's taken to get to this point. But I will give you a wee bit of background on why we have decided to run this campaign now. So, as I'm sure most of you know, the Irish Language Act is proposed legislation that would afford the Irish language similar status that Welsh would have in Wales and that Scots Gaelic has in Scotland. I should mention too that we're delighted to be joined this evening by both Liz Saville-Roberts, who's a Plaid Cymru member, Welsh speaker and the first person to speak Irish in Parliament, and also Angus McNeill, an SNP member and Gaelic speaker, and both who have shown their support for the Irish Language Act in the past. So we're delighted to have representation from other speakers of Celtic languages in the UK who know how important this is to us. So the Act is supported by the majority of parties in the North, but due to DUP opposition, the Executive and Stormont have remained in deadlock over the issue. And now the Secretary for State for Northern Ireland, Brandon Lewis, has said that if the Executive can't make a decision on the Irish Language Act by the end of September, it'll be taken before the government in Westminster in October, where it is likely to pass. Although this version of the Act does not contain everything that the communities calling for it would like, they do welcome it as a step forward after a decade-long fight to get to this point. So as people living in Britain now, this is where we're able to help, where we maybe haven't been able to before. I don't know your individual circumstances and reasons for being here tonight, but I'm from the North myself. I intend to return one day, and it can be frustrating to watch a campaign for something so close to your heart and not be able to get out and march with like-minded people. I know a few of us that have organised the campaign have felt the same way, and many more of us here tonight understand the significance of the Irish Language Act in the North for the protection of the Irish language in a wider context as well. So the aim of the campaign that we'll be running will be to be garnering support for the Act from our MPs to show that amongst the minority languages in the UK, we're not actually asking for anything different, and to spread the word in Britain about the importance of the Act for Northern Ireland and build a wee bit of a link for those who have fought so hard for the Act in the North, but who are now slightly geographically removed from where the Act is likely to be passed. So we're able now to be the mouthpiece for Irish speakers in the North. So I'm really grateful and proud to see so many of you here ready to lend your support to the campaign. So now I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who's going to give you a wider background of the Irish Language Act and speak to you about the history of the community campaign for proper recognition and what has led to this point. So Crahar is the advocacy manager for Acht Gaeilge and is part of Acht Gaeilge, the community-based group that has done incredible work on behalf of the Irish language community in the North, and that has been absolutely unrelenting in their work towards an Irish Language Act. So Crahar Rialtas.
Gurmagad Sean Gurmila dús míle buchas de cógáil na Breataine Críomh Larfuil Críomh London as an Imeacht seo agra an Acht agus an curú daoine and Dram Jarg anseo. I suppose just a bit about myself. Firstly, I was just thanking Sean there for cógáil na Breataine for organising the event. It's hugely helpful. It'll be an assistance in the campaign moving forward. Is something that we're looking forward to and working alongside of. I suppose a wee bit about myself. My name's Crahar Moody. I'm a member of Dram Jarg, the campaign group for language rights here in the North. I was born and raised in Belfast, and I attended the second established primary school here in the North, which was Gaeilge, and then I attended college the first year, the only post-primary school at the time, and the largest still on the island of Ireland, with college the first year. And now we have our second one in South Derry. And it's there I got involved in the language revival in different initiatives, and then started working for Glór na Móna at around 2009. I worked for them for about 10 years, developing an Irish medium youth sector, trying to establish services and increasing opportunities for young people outside of the school gates. And in 2019, I started to work with Acht Gaeilge, and I've been their advocacy manager working on the campaign for language rights here in the North. So I know we haven't all night, but I will try and do here is maybe chart the development of the language rights campaign, the challenges that we have had and we've been facing, and the continued denial of rights to those who wish to live their lives through Irish here in the North of Ireland. And I suppose it's important to bring ourselves back a bit. I suppose the best place to start this story and to understand today's campaign is, I suppose, is in the context of maybe a hidden Ulster or the rise of the Gaeilge, when pioneers of the first Gaeltacht established outside of the Gaeltacht, the first urban Gaeltacht established on the Shaw's Road, set up the first Irish language primary school, Bunscoil Fubble First in 1969. And from the development of that school and the establishment of that school, it has planted the seed of what we now have 12 schools in the greater Belfast area, probably, I think, the guts of 40 now peppered across the North, and a growing revival in the social use of the language with youth clubs, GA teams, families raising their children through Irish, and many community and youth centres solely functioning through the medium of Irish. And I think that's important, is that we get a wee flavour of what actually we talk about when we talk about the revival of the language. Because if you had thought about the establishment of that school in 1969, Bunscoil Fubble First, and to think of where we are today, it is often what is missing from the debate around the Irish Language Act is the fact that we have a very active and growing community of speakers who are serious about reviving the Irish language as a viable daily community languages for as many people as possible. And we now have 7,000 children being educated currently in Irish medium education. And this is important because the Language Act hasn't therefore been plucked from the sky to promote an overtly political agenda, or some maybe have alleged, or a means to erode others' sense of identity. I think it's put simply, the demand for a Language Act comes from that understanding of international best practice. It's based on international experience and international expertise, and that it can assist in the revival. And I will not deal with all the issues that we face as a language community, and I will not put the language on the lips of any newborn baby. But I think our good friend Fernando Fernandez, the UN Special Rapporteur on minority issues, and he talks about what he said is respect for language of individuals flows from that fundamental right, and is not some special concession or privileged treatment. Simply put, it is that right to be treated equally without discrimination, to which everyone is entitled. So the Dram Jarg, as a group, we were established in 2016. That's coming up to 5 years ago. It's nearly 4 years, or sorry, just after 4 years ago, when thousands took to the streets for the first time under the banner of Dram Jarg in May 2017. And our campaign organically grew in the response to the decision of then DUP Minister Paul Gibbon to remove the £50,000 LEFA scholarship grant Now, what is the LEFA Scholarship Grant? That is a grant that was given to children. It was means tested. It went to those children from working class, more poorer background, and it assisted them in a Gaeltacht summer scheme in the summer. It was a cross-community grant. So while the Minister wisely returned the grant via tweet on the day of the protest outside of his office, his regressive and hostile attack on the minority community, on Irish speakers, inspired an autonomous movement for change, which has successfully elevated discussion around the status of Irish here, which was mainly in the margins of society, to the very centre of our political discourse. And despite the campaign, prior to that, we had 3 public consultations on an Irish Language Act. No such act has been implemented following those consultations. In fact, it had been bitterly opposed. And one of those consultations had a 95% response rate in favour of an act. So the denial of language rights and in particular opposition, particularly from the DUP to equality for Irish speakers, has remained and remained the single biggest issue preventing the return of power sharing. And with the, I suppose, with LEFA, it was kind of, with the collapse of the institutions in January 2017, was considered the straw that broke the camel's back. And that was until January 2020, when the 5 parties, including the DUP, signed up to the New Decade New Approach. The New Decade New Approach was an agreement that 5 parties signed up to, and the core component of that agreement was the introduction of Irish language legislation. But I have to bring you back a bit further to the Good Friday Agreement, with the beginnings of this journey of Irish language in the prism of equality and the beginning of language legislation, because the Good Friday Agreement, as we all know, was signed and ratified by both the British and Irish governments, and was to herald this new era of equality in the North. Historical grievances would be addressed, and marginalised sections of the community would be brought in from the cold. And amongst key issues covered by the Good Friday Agreement was the issues of rights and respect for the Irish language community, and in particular around Irish medium education, which is considered like cúisle na haibheáin, which is central to our Irish language revival. And this presented an opportunity for the state in the North to reset the relationship with the Irish-speaking community and with the Irish medium education sector after many decades of hostility and opposition. Though relatively vague in nature, I think the attempt to include Irish language in the broader equality agenda was symbolically important. It represented huge progress in regards to elements of education and some funding in relation to the statutory bodies such as Acht Gaeilge. And ultimately, as well, they'd commit the British government commitment to bringing about an Irish Language Act based on the experiences of Wales, and in that commitment in St Andrews in 2006. And the British government, even in 2001, adopted the European Charter for Regional Minority Languages, and that was following commitments within the Good Friday Agreement. However, and despite this, and many of these commitments remain largely ignored, and more than 15 years later, these commitments have yet to be delivered upon. And when I mean largely ignored, you're talking about state bodies, public bodies, local authorities, largely ignoring and sometimes actively discouraging any proactive policies in relation to the language, and some of them adopting English-only policies. So without that formal legal protection, speakers of our Indigenous language do not enjoy equal rights that our Welsh, Scottish, or even Gaeilge in the south of Ireland enjoy. And additionally, as well as that, the Irish language and its ever-increasing community of speakers has been subject to consistent attacks by numerous elected officials, government departments, ministers, and at high levels of our government here at Stormont, as high as up as our first ministers. So that lack of status has been compounded by those attacks and insults, and they're not from the margins. They're very much from mainstream political parties who hold significant amounts of power and are responsible for government departments like education or communities and other things. And in recent times, we have seen the likes of the DUP who have halted proposals for development of Irish schools, nurture units for nurseries and primary schools, stripped Irish of government websites, and ensure that it's been without sight, and tried to do their best to hinder progress and development of the language. And we've been waiting almost 3 centuries on the repeal of the last penal law, which is the 1737 penal law banning Irish in courts. We've been waiting on 23 years on this new era of equality promised in the Good Friday Agreement, and 15 years on, from the Irish Language Act and strategy that was promised at the St Andrews Agreement. And now we're in a situation where over a year and a half since the latest commitments on language legislation as part of the new decade, new approach. So we now find ourselves in another phase. We now await the British government to fulfil its commitment that the DUP have reneged on, and what Brandon Lewis, the Secretary of State here in the North, has said that if Stormont doesn't introduce an Irish Language Act by September, and we know they won't, we know that the EU police aren't going to do that, they know they've said that publicly, that they will step in October to introduce this in the autumn. So these commitments, a new decade, new approach, and I think Sean alluded to this earlier, in comparison to the Welsh legislation that was referenced in St Andrews Agreement, there are huge gaps. It does fall the new decade, new approach commitments fall way short of what we would argue is international standards and way short of what others would enjoy, particularly in the Welsh experience. These provisions, therefore, must be viewed as a staging post in an ongoing journey towards full equality and recognition after decades and indeed centuries of exclusion, marginalisation and regressive policies that have deliberately banned and removed the language from public life and sight, and even to this day, where often the language isn't visible in many of our street names or place names or road signs and tourist destinations or tourist sites. So the language, the latest announcement, the latest announcement that the language legislation will be brought through Westminster, however, despite our concerns, is the historic announcement. It's the first time since the British government, since agreeing to introduce an Irish Language Act in St Andrews in 2006, that the British government has publicly committed to enact legislation. And the important thing about it is that they're actually subverting the veto of political unionism to prevent our rights being provided for through Stormont. And there has been, I suppose, a precedent centre around marriage equality, around women's rights, where they have intervened. And I think this announcement is a step change. It leaves us in a stronger position. But it is a testament to the community, to the commitment and perseverance of our community, which has seen schools, young people, parents, families take to the streets for many years in pursuit of equality and human rights. And the announcement is a direct result of that activism, that grassroots organising. And we commend the community, the schools, the young people for their diligence and dedication, because the Dram Jarrah campaign, I suppose, from then until now has proved that ordinary people can make that change happen from below. And we're proud to have played that positive role and enable civil society to reclaim its democratic voice and holding those to power and responsibility to account. But I think this is where you come in, for those who are in Britain, and the role that you have to play is that we do have concerns. I think the Irish language community rightly have grave concerns around the British government's long-standing failure to honour agreements and rights. This commitment comes 15 years after they committed to an Irish Language Act and an internationally binding agreement, one they have reneged on ever since. So we have a duty in the Dram Jarrah to ensure local parties now, remain local parties, that they have an obligation to ensure the British government fulfills its obligations and latest commitment without any delay. And we have been brought to this edge, I suppose, once again, because of the obstructionism within the DUP, who have acted in bad faith, who signed up to an agreement and acted in bad faith by their inability to accept long-standing human rights commitments for the Irish language community here in the north of Ireland. And they've once again elevated their opposition to language rights over the need for what we would argue is a truly shared and inclusive society. So we would commit for the full implementation of language legislation. We would hope and we would prefer that it was delivered in September, but as we know, the clock is ticking. We know the DUP have no intention of doing that, and that will fail, no doubtedly, that won't happen. And we hope that, and we are wanting to, I suppose, ensure that the British government to honour their latest commitment by October. And we don't intend to be mere spectators, and we will be organising, setting our own campaign and agenda as we have done so in recent years. Furthermore, we commit to pursuing a full, comprehensive, rights-based Acht Gaeilge that will deliver for full equality for our community in the coming years. And while that legislation falls way short of the international standard, it is nevertheless an historic advancement for our campaign for rights and equality. However, we don't have that trust and faith in the British government to do so. And that's why it's important that you can assist us, you can help us in our campaign to ensure that the Secretary of State and the British government, number 10 Downing Street, commit to what they have promised to in the implementation of language rights here in the North.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Carter. And I think that's a really helpful thing for us to be told what can seem sometimes like quite a complicated political issue. Actually, you know, for us to have an in-depth understanding and a really descriptive and passionate overview from yourself, especially around the communities that have done so much of this work already over the last 10 years, to get us to this point where there is a sudden kind of movement. Thank you very much, Conor, or Crahar, and next, I would like to introduce you to another speaker who's going to give us a different perspective on the Irish Language Act. So while there exists, as Crahar detailed there for us, strong unionist opposition to the Irish Language Act within the DUP, there has also been a long history of the Irish language in unionist communities in Ireland. And Linda Irvine is part of that strong tradition and is the Gaeilge promoting the continuance of that tradition in East Belfast, where she manages Tourists, a project that connects Protestant and Unionist communities with their heritage in the language. She's been recently awarded an MBE for her services to the Irish language, co-argist Linda, and she has spearheaded the establishment of New Irish Language Nursery School in East Belfast and is the president of East Belfast's first GA club. So Linda, over to you.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, I'll give you a little bit of background. As I say, I come from the Protestant community. I come from a loyalist area in East Belfast, so I knew nothing about the Irish language until I was introduced to it just over 10 years ago. And Hichme and Rialtas in Changa, I just fell in love with the language and started to learn it. I really didn't think it would end up with me at university. I was sort of seeking a couple of focal and ended up with a degree, or on the way to a degree. But it was that beginning, that journey that has been life-changing for me. It really has been life-changing for me and for a lot of people now around me. And one of the first things I discovered was that, of course, I wasn't the first Protestant to start learning Irish. There was lots of others, but because my husband happened to be the leader of the Progressive Unionist Party at the time, it was seen as newsworthy. It ended up in a few newspapers. I mentioned East Belfast Mission, where I'd been introduced to the language. They were then inundated by their own staff and locals who were interested in the language. And from that, I started on a voluntary basis doing a class, and then we ended up receiving funding from Acht Gaeilge and established Tourists, which is the project that I run. And I think the first thing that I have to say is that no matter what is in the press, no matter what you read in the media about, you know, unionism is against the Irish language, unionists have no interest in the Irish language, that isn't actually true. There are a lot of people within the unionist community who are interested in the language. And I would say, to break it down, there is a minority of people within the unionist community who are very, very hostile to the language. There's another minority who are really, really interested in the language. And then there's a majority who really don't care and are quite happy for people to get on with their lives. And that is the reality. And I think that's something actually that Brandon Lewis has discovered recently. Let me tell you about my attitude to language legislation and the journey that I've went on with it as well. Because when I got involved with the Irish language and then with Tourists, I didn't know anything about language legislation. I didn't know that there was a Language Act in Scotland or a Language Act in Wales. I had no idea. I didn't even really know that other minority languages were spoken throughout the British Isles. And I think a lot of people, especially people within the unionist community, are in that situation. You know, we're total monoglots and we think English is the only language that exists. So for me, my attitude was, and this was during the time of the flag protests in Belfast, which was quite a tense time, especially in the area that I live and work in East Belfast. It was one of the worst affected areas. So my attitude was, well, you know, nobody's stopping me from learning Irish. It's not an issue. So why did you need legislation? Like, what's that all about? You know, it just seems a bit controversial to me, and probably would be better staying away from that. And also maybe the Irish language community need to have a bit of patience. Now, what I didn't know was they'd already been waiting many, many years, and they had been very, very patient. I was really new to the game. And then what I started to see was the way people were treated because they were Irish speakers. And I heard numerous stories, and I was really shocked. And I also saw the way that I was treated because I had taken this interest in Irish language and because I had set up an Irish language centre, that I was selling out Ulster. I was driving people, you know, in the United Ireland, that I was, you know, I sat at home sewing up tricolours and plotting the downfall of the state, you know, just all these things. I think there was one social media post. I didn't even do social media at this time. I didn't even know what social media was. I was really shocked when I saw this conversation online that somebody showed me. And it said myself, my husband and my late brother-in-law, we were leading the Protestant people down the green brick road into the Irish bog. I thought, my God, I'm only going to a class and learning a wee bit of Irish, you know, it seemed a bit extreme. I think the turning point, well, there was a couple of turning points for me. I went to Scotland, and Angus is there, and it's Angus's predecessor. Alistair was one of the people I met, and he was the MSP, the Labour MSP in the islands. And he had been the first minister who was, you know, his post was created after the Scottish legislation went through. And Alistair would be very much, would see himself as a unionist. My husband and I were over with Alistair the week before the referendum, and he and my husband were giving out their Union Jacks. And Alistair is very, very in favour of language legislation, both in Scotland and in Northern Ireland. He talked to me, and I met Bord na Gaeilge, and he talked to me about, though the Scottish Act is quite soft in comparison to the Welsh Act, but the things that they were able to do. And I think one of the big things that struck me in the Scottish Act is it asks for respect for the language. And I don't see respect for the Irish language in Northern Ireland. In fact, I see anything but at times. Another thing that really pushed me was when a certain DUP minister stood up in the assembly and made fun of the language, curry my yoghurt. Not only did he do it there, but then later on at the party's, you know, big yearly conference, he did it again, and it got a lot of laughs and claps. And I thought, well, you know, if that had been the Chinese language or another language that is spoken in Northern Ireland, it wouldn't have been allowed. So why is that okay for the Irish language? I, by this time, had changed my mind about legislation, and I realised, yeah, actually, we do need legislation. And my husband said, say nothing, keep your mouth shut. Do not voice that, because you will damage yourself, you will damage your work. And I thought, well, I can't believe something and not say it. I can't, because that's wrong. And I was approached by another organisation, an Irish language organisation, to go to Stormont and hand in a letter protesting about the treatment of the language and also being in favour of language legislation. And I was asked to speak on the Spotlight programme. And I have to say I had a few sleepless nights about it, because it would have been so much easier for me to say, no, I want to just stay out of that. I want to be non-political. But I knew that I had to speak out. And again, my husband said, Linda, you will alienate the very people who support you. Do you not know what you're risking? And I didn't know what I was risking. I was risking the organisation that I had created, and I was risking my own safety. And I knew that. But I felt it was wrong to believe something and to say something else. And Northern Ireland's full of that. People who believe one thing and say something else because it's politically useful. So I did speak out, and I have to say I prayed about it, and I spoke out, and it didn't do me any harm. I lost a few people, and I had discussions with other people, but it was okay. And over the past lot of years, I've had many, many conversations, especially during the 3 years when Stormont was down, about why legislation was important. And a lot of people came round to my way of thinking. And I'm still saying it, and I still believe that legislation is important, and I know this legislation is very soft, and I don't know what particular changes it's going to make, but it's the first step in the language having recognition in Northern Ireland. And I feel very, very frustrated that it doesn't have recognition. We have 7,000 children being educated through a language that has no legal standing whatsoever in Northern Ireland. Very recently, we have attempted to set up an Irish-speaking nursery school, an integrated Irish-speaking nursery school in East Belfast. And we've had interest from parents. We had no problem whatsoever filling places. We managed to get funding, we managed to get staff, and then the intimidation started because we were going temporarily into a loyalist estate. Now, the background of this is I had been invited into this loyalist estate to teach Irish in the primary school, which I'd been doing for 3 months, and then was told there was an old mobile at the back of the school that wasn't used, and we could ask permission from the Education Authority to use it, which we did. Now, there's 400 odd children in this school, and a handful of parents removed their children from the classes. So over 400 parents in this school, they are happy with their children learning Irish. You know, that doesn't speak to me of intolerance. That doesn't speak to me of condemnation. That speaks to me of people who are actually very tolerant. And a tiny number of people started an online hate campaign, put posters up around the estate with my face on them and a supposed quote from me, which we had to involve the police, and the police saw it as enough of a threat to put security cameras up at my house. So it's been very, very difficult, very difficult. My local MP tweeted what I'll call a soft message of condemnation and praised the local principal of the primary school, contacted the principal of the primary school, but never at any time contacted anybody from the committee of níos, Seoladh. I feel very aggrieved because what I see is the situation with the language legislation, which has been going on all these years. And I told the Irish government this a number of years ago. This is like a pot boiling on a stove. It's not going to go away. It's not going to stop. It's just going to keep boiling over and causing harm until it's dealt with. And the minute it's dealt with, there'll be a few shouts. Yeah, there'll be a few shouts and there'll be a few angry ones. They'll probably be outside my door. They'll not be outside the DUP's door or anybody else's door. They'll come to my office and they'll shout a bit, and then they'll go away, and then it'll all be over. And then we'll all get on with the important work that we need to do. But why we don't do that, we are causing trouble. And it should have been done years ago. And because of it, that is the very thing that has made me vulnerable, has made my organisation vulnerable, has made níos, Seoladh vulnerable, has made our 3-year-old children vulnerable. Tomorrow night, there'll be a protest in the Bramwell estate against us, even though we're not going to the Bramwell estate, even though we have sourced another venue with great difficulty and expense that we don't actually have. We have managed to do that. And yet tomorrow night, there will still be a protest against something that doesn't exist anymore. This is one of the reasons, one of the many, many reasons that we need to push this thing forward, because the reality is that the majority of people in the unionist community do not care. They are not interested. They want to get on with their lives. And the small minority of people who are against the Irish language, it doesn't matter how long we wait or any programs of education, they will not change, because it comes from a place of bigotry, comes from a place of fear, comes from a place of misinformation. And the only way to solve that is push ahead, have the act and let people see, well, you know, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. And if you're not an Irish speaker, this doesn't impact you. Sinead.
Thank you so much, Linda, and thank you for sharing that. It's a pretty harrowing story, but it does show the need for something like this. And although it's really, really saddening to hear, particularly the campaign against you personally as well, just because of the things that you've done through the Irish language and because of the Irish language and for the Irish language, it just emphasizes the need. But our thanks to you, and particularly for coming on and telling us that. And it is fantastic to see the work going ahead despite these people and despite the opposition, and that that you have the support of people that, as you say, either are interested within unionist communities and have that kind of love for the language and realise that it is an important part of a unionist heritage as well, and it's not just a kind of nationalist thing, and it's shared across the island. So it's really good to hear your perspective and understand that there are those positive attitudes that kind of will always outshine those kind of negative and bigoted attitudes. And yeah, that commitment to the shared linguistic heritage in the North will be the most important thing. So thank you, Linda. And I'd like to tell you a wee bit more now about the action that we're asking people to take as part of this campaign. So we've put together a template letter, which I'll send to you after this event this evening. And this is a letter that we've drafted out to be shared with your MP. And we'd love to get in touch with your local MP if you are in Britain with it. The letter will give a wee bit of background, letting them know that the Act will come before Parliament in the autumn, most likely. And also has space for you to write in why this campaign is important to you, because I know there are so many varied and different reasons why people are giving their support this evening. So we're aiming to raise awareness here. I've recently written to my own MP who knew nothing about it, but was very much in support and had a very positive response back from her. So if your MP does get back to you, and especially if that response is positive, we'd love you to let us know if you email us on lairfulcnaj@mail.com, and I'll share that again after the event. We'd like to keep track of who we're getting in touch with and just see what kind of response comes back from that as well. Speak about the Irish Language Act to your friends and family in Britain. Let them know that they could have a bit of an influence here as well. Share that letter, and if there's anybody that you feel might be interested, we're happy for that to go on. Get in touch with the people that we need to get in touch with. And then I'll say as well, just to keep an eye out for an event that we'll organise in October at Westminster, where we'll be asking politicians to join us to show their support for the Act. So if you see anything happening on our social media accounts, that's between ourselves, Conor na Gaeilge in London, Conor na Gaeilge in Glasgow, and the Message to Margaret campaign, as well as then Conor na Gaeilge themselves and Andram Jarrag. Just share them, like them, and kind of let the message go on. And of course, please post your own support for the Act if you have a social media account. And for this campaign online, we'll share the hashtags that Andram Jarrag use, and we have one as well for Tacaíocht this campaign. We'd love to see you dress in Andram Jarrag's red and white colours and send pictures and tweets in support of the campaign. So I'll circulate all that information along with the letter when the event comes to a close. But for now, I'd like to open the floor to a few questions, or if anybody has any questions for our speakers or for ourselves. And Neil's just shared the letter in the chat there as well. I'll go out in the email too, so if you want to grab it now, you can. It's in the chat. So if anybody wants to ask a question, if you want to fire something into the chat or raise your hand, and we'll come and unmute you. So we've got a few takers here. So I'm going to ask Angus if you would like to speak first. I'll ask you to unmute. Oh, there we go.
Hi, thanks very much. I'm Angus Woodil, MP for Nihilling in year, Outer Hebrides of Scotland. Sorry for joining late, firstly, and excellent to hear Linda as ever. Some people have said Linda is indeed a wonderful woman. I think I've told her that a few times, so she shouldn't be blushing at all. Just on 2 points that Linda, I see Liz Saville Roberts is also here from Plaid Cymru too. Hi Liz, we've not seen each other for a while. On 2 points that Linda raised, particularly in reference to Alistair Morrison, the former MSP in this area, and a point that's allied to that is actually most Gaelic speakers I know are Protestants, as Linda will know, and a good load of those are nationalists and a good load of those are unionists, just depending on what they think of the idea. But Alistair Morrison would still be interested in support, I would imagine. But he's also, Linda, you might not know, he's now, I think, involved with Rangers Football Club in a media role. And the significance of being involved in Rangers and being as thorough and as strong a Gaelic language supporter as he is, I'm sure won't be lost on you at all. And the second was just for your amusement, Gregory Campbell's Curry My Yoghurt line. I met him in the comments a while after it. And I said to him, I see you're taking Gaelic lessons, Gregory. I hope you continue because you haven't quite hit the pronunciation properly yet. So hopefully we got one back on Gregory in that one. But I suppose on the political side, just for your sensitivity, just for your knowledge and the sensitivities within the SNP, where I am on this, is that we've always thought that obviously we want self-determination for Scotland and we'd like Scotland to run itself. So there's been a lot of internal debate about us going and voting for Ireland, and in the past certainly voting for other areas of the UK. So it's not yet cut and dried in the SNP, although when it came to, I think it was abortion legislation or other stuff, some of the SNP completely ripped that up and went and voted on that. Others didn't. So we're at 6s and 7s, to be frank. I hope there's no journalists over their approach to votes in Northern Ireland. So while I'm definitely personally very sympathetic as somebody who speaks Scottish Gaelic and a smattering of Irish Gaelic, my mother being from Waterford, the political space we occupy at the moment isn't cut and dried. I know where my sympathies are, and I know where the principles are, or the former principles were. So just so you're all aware of that, if you're dealing with SNP MPs, that you've got maybe an extra push to go on that. And I'm also talking to myself there. And that's enough for me. Thank you very much for letting me in.
Angus, and thank you very much for it. Is very useful to have that kind of that knowledge of where the party's kind of movement might be within around an issue like that. So thank you very much for talking to us on that. I'll go to Liz now. Sorry, go on ahead. I'll ask Liz now if she's had her hand up, so she would like to say something to us. Thanks, Liz.
Rudderwan is mission een geergine Gaeilge a hail e Hansard, ach by Thomas O'Donnell and head for Gaeilge a lower in Parliament. I have to say that. I have to say that to be fair, or it's a false claiming false glory otherwise. Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. I could talk, not surprisingly, quite a lot about Mesur Iaith Gymraeg, the Welsh language measure. And the legislation that we've had. The legislation in Wales, actually, you're talking about 3 considerable pieces of legislation over the last, actually, 60 years, although there was legislation prior to that as well. And it's been a steady matter, but I think the one thing, and this is what I found, so I don't want to use the word inspiring lightly with Linda, but I think that what she has to say will cut across does cut across some of the stereotypes of what is the received wisdom here in Parliament. And I think that's a very, very important thing to do. And also to talk, I know that the previous Welsh Language Commissioner, and by the way, actually the concept of the Welsh Language Commissioner does come from the Republic's idea of a commissioner there as well. We didn't have one previously. So this is an interesting interaction there. But she has spoken very powerfully about language as a uniting factor, and that we're looking at to bringing communities together and for increasing people's experiences, increasing the richness of people's lives, and it for always being something that adds and never something that takes away. And I think these messages are something that we really need to get through. I would be very, very keen to help you with the event in Westminster. I'm sure that Angus said as well. We actually have some of the similar dilemma as Angus was explaining with the SNP for Plaid Cymru as well. We also are seeking independence in various stages and at various speeds for Wales, so that there is a political issue for us with supporting what is intervening in another parliament. But also we had much discussion on the abortion issue. In fact, because human rights were a reserved matter, that actually gave us a route to argue for that. We will do everything we can, and I'm off the record that if we will be looking for an argument to support you as much as we can in this matter as well. But certainly to be raising this, I can only emphasise, do raise this with your local MPs, and please assume that they know very, very little, and that they may well have quite a stereotyped idea. But what we can do with you to support in Westminster, very keen to do that. And I would say also that David T.C. Davis, who's now the junior minister in the Wales office, he's met some representatives talking about Acht Gaeilge in the past, and he probably in the government can't say anything too official, but nonetheless the government is bringing this forward. So I would use that to effect, if possible.
Liz, thank you, and it's useful again to have that perspective from Plaid Cymru and from a Welsh perspective as well. I think Darren, oh sorry, no, that's a wee clappy hand, but it's not a raised hand. Has anybody else got any questions? I think I have Craher.
Yeah, I would just like to thank for the contributions from the both who were speaking just in relation to the political perspective. I think from our own perspective, we are trying to build a unanimous as much as possible around a vote. If this does come to a vote or if this has to pass through, we're not too sure in Westminster what way it'll go through, whether it's accelerated passage or an emergency legislation, who knows. But it is planned to go through in the autumn, and we are trying to build that cross-party support. And I know, of course, like there are many people from our own community who had concerns with Westminster intervening in the Irish Affairs, but we would stress the importance of the obstructionism on human rights, and this is one of the only avenues that we have left, and it's crucially important. The other thing is that would be seeking that any MP possible, and even if you're writing letters to your MPs, to maybe we try and meet with them, as much of them as possible. Maybe we're willing to able on behalf of Conn Gaeilge organise an event in Westminster, and it would be good to have maybe speeches and stuff to represent maybe the Dramjorg or the Irish community in Britain and others, and I think that would be important symbolically to know, because part of the normalisation is that this doesn't happen in Stormont. It's often a politicized, toxic nature of debate that happens in Stormont. And if we can normalise that in Westminster and across party support, that'll send a huge message back to those who continue to wish to exclude the language.
That's something we can think about.
Is she frozen?
I think possibly Siúan's internet's a little bit dodgy. Yeah, but definitely, as Craher just mentioned, an event at Westminster is something that we were thinking about. Again, that's on with the the combined campaign, which involves Conn Gaeilge London, but also the branches from Liverpool and Glasgow are both here tonight as well, and the family of Margaret Keane, who are also present tonight too.
Can I?
Yeah, Angus Kershaw.
Sorry, yeah. Liz mentioned an interesting point with David T.C. Davis there, who I've spoken to about this, and he's also been speaking to a number of other Welsh MPs, which Liz probably knows about as well, Tory Welsh MPs who would be quite supportive. Now, it's quite significant to get these guys in. And as Liz spoke there, I thought maybe I could approach Scottish Tory MPs, who, believe it or not, we can speak to quite civilly on the whole, and see if any of those would be prepared to be supportive. I think the Welsh will be the lead on this. The Welsh Tories, Liz, will probably be the lead on this to try and put a sort of a prong in and amongst that. And if to see the Welsh Tories are making a move, it might help Scottish Tories also to make a move, and then if you've got two lots of Celtic Tories, we'll then go for our Anglo-Saxon neighbour Tories as well. I don't know what you think about that, Liz.
Yeah, I think because David T.C. Davis has learned Welsh, so he's got a real interest in languages, and he then could be quite influential, I should think. But there are, again, if we sort of use those who've shown some interest in Welsh, I regularly get Tory MPs showing surprising amounts of interest in Welsh, actually. So there's a number that we could approach by different routes.
Yeah, I have found the same here in Northern Ireland, and it's quite strange for me because I've certainly never been a Tory supporter, and the Conservative Party here, which is very tiny, but they're very positive towards me. They've come and seen me, and have actually been in contact with me just this evening, actually. And so and I think you just have to reach out and make friends with anybody you can, Angus. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
Okay,
the language transcends all the politics and all the rest of it, because the language, and I think you made a really good point there about the reconciliation aspect of the language, and that's what I found. People tell me, oh, the language is divisive and that's why we don't want it. It's absolute opposite. It's a medium of reconciliation where I work, and it's bringing people together in a shared interest and a shared love. It's the people outside that throwing stones at it. They're the ones who are divisive, certainly not the language or the people that are involved in the language.
Just briefly again, the Conservative Party in Northern Ireland, which I didn't realise existed, might be useful as well if we can identify MPs to point out to you to get them to write to in support, because
there is no MPs. They are
but MPs in Scotland.
Oh yeah, on that. Yeah.
So if myself and Liz are seeing waverers about to get a letter from the Tories wing in Northern Ireland, the genuine Tories, it might be helpful in the push you're making. So the fact that they're supportive of the Gaelic language in the north of Ireland is hugely helpful, I imagine.
Well, thank you. Julian, I think, has something to say as well.
It was great to hear the talks tonight, and the support from Angus and Liz is very, very important for sure. And I suppose one thing though, when Conor Gaeilge there, when we met with Robin Walker, and when we met with Brandon Lewis, it's good to say, and it's important to say as well, that they were very, very supportive. They put it across that they understood completely where we're coming from, and that they couldn't understand why this can't be got over the line, or why it wasn't brought over the line. So I think we're starting from a good point with them. Obviously, we can't be 100% fully trust what's going on at the moment. Something could change very rapidly, but they were very, very supportive. And Brandon himself talked an awful lot of what he did for Cornish, and Robin talked an awful lot about the Welsh and his father being involved in that as well. So I think they are in a good place at the moment. So the more letters that these get, the more that it's said to Brandon, more it's said to Robin Walker as well, will push this along and make sure that they bring it as a priority, because it's easy for these things to slide in terms of timescale. He was talking, I suppose at the end of September they have an assembly, and then he was talking about October, and then it was the conference season, and also it's getting pushed back a little bit more and a little bit more. But we really want to see this, we really want to push this, that it is actually brought to Westminster before the end of October is really what we would like to see happen. So that will take, letters, it will take maybe, as we talked previously about having a launch outside Westminster with the different parties as well. And I think Croher's point is very important, that if we can show how this isn't divisive, and that it is, supported by across the board by the different parties, bar maybe one from the north of Ireland, I think it'd be a hugely positive message, and I think we could get that then into Westminster and done very rapidly. He wasn't sure if accelerated passage or not. It'd be great if it was accelerated passage, but maybe we could work on that with the Northern Ireland Committee as well, and see if we can push that as well. So as much support as possible in terms of getting in touch with MPs and pushing this along, and anything Angus and Liz can do to help that would be very appreciative.
Yeah, super. There seems to be a lot of conversations coming out of tonight that we could get together and talk again about this. There does seem to be quite a lot that may need a little more talking beyond what we'll have time for this evening, but we'll definitely get in touch with everybody who's interested and maybe set up another smaller meeting to talk through some of those points as well. Has anybody else got anything they'd like to say or any questions? Mike, I can see you've got your hand up there.
Hi, I'm Mike. I'm a Labour councillor on the Cabinet of Salford City Council. I've already written to Rebecca Long Bailey, who seems supportive, and so I'm trying to see if she will attend the council meeting. But it's just dawned on me during this conversation about the network of MPs across the northwest, Labour MPs, that I either know or know someone who knows them very well. So I'm going to task myself. I've made a list of about 11 that I think I will contact, and they will know who I am. Not saying they will be supportive, but just that perhaps if we did it regionally, along party lines, that might be a tactic just by dividing up the work. That's it, Chair.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Mike. It's brilliant to hear that you have a few contacts that you have in mind, and yeah, we'd be really appreciative of any contact that you can make with them and asking for their support. Has anybody else got anything they'd like to say?
Just very briefly on Mike's point, I think myself and Liz may or may not know some of the one of us may or may not, the other won't, you know what I'm trying to say, know these 11 MPs, and if you've any waverers, Mike, that you think might need pushed along, because if we know them personally, like Conor McGinn and Wigan is an obvious one that we'll have no difficulty with at all. But there'll be others that maybe need a push, a nudge, or a wee bit of support. So even though we're different parties, I say, but behind the scenes, we some of us get on surprisingly well. So if you feel that you want to share that with either of us, I think I could put it to use anyway, Liz. If it's anybody I knew, would you feel the same?
Yeah, well, Conor McGinn is the obvious one, actually, who we should have a go with very early on.
We just set Conor to work, maybe.
Yeah.
It's not on my list, unfortunately. Yeah, I can, if I provide it to the email that you're going to give us, I'll give you a list of who I'm contacting, and I'll try and keep you up to date with responses that I get back. And then if there are some waivers there, we could direct you towards them. Yeah, okay.
Brilliant, super. Somebody, Claire, has said in the chat here as well, I've just picked this up, how about the Irish press in Britain? And that is something that we thought about as part of the campaign. So this is us obviously launching this evening. I know the Message to Margaret campaign with Caroline Brogan and Margaret Keane's family had success with their campaign and had a lot of positive support from the Irish press here in Britain. So we'll be getting in contact with them again, and Caroline and Bez and Kaz have had good contacts with members of the press here, so we'll definitely be using some of that as well. Darren has said it might be an idea to, everybody's moving here, might be an idea to somehow get some of the UK politicians on the Nolan show when it inevitably comes round. Potentially.
I know you're laughing there, but actually that's a really good point, because one of the things, and Crocker will know this, that did so much damage was the media and the Nolan show in particular. As every morning you had this regurgitated about the terrible dangers of Irish language legislation. So actually, if we could get, British politicians, especially sort of Welsh, Cornish, Scottish, and, English ones, would come out publicly and be making statements and doing media addresses saying, this is all fine. This is what I've been trying to say. This is a British thing. This is what we do in Britain. We look after our minority languages, so we're going to treat Northern Ireland exactly the same. That will help to take the sting out of it. And the rational, reasonable people within the unionist community will get on board and say, oh, right, okay, that's fine. Yes, you'll still get that minority, but you're always going to have them anyway. So we really do need that really visible support from British politicians.
Yeah, super. Darren, I think, did you want to say something on that as well? I think you had unmuted yourself there.
No, I was just agreeing with Linda. So
super. Well, okay, yeah, we'll add that to the list of things to have a little think about, and we'll see what we can do with trying to get some coverage in the north from UK politicians that are in support of Celtic and minority languages here. We've got a few hands up now. I'll go to Oisín.
Thanks very much, and thank you to all the speakers, and above all to Linda for honestly such an inspiring and such an admirable story. Thank you so much. The thing that I wanted to say was that I wrote to my MP, who is Catherine West in the Labour Party. I got a very encouraging response from her, and indeed I was slightly taken aback by what she said, because she said the Labour Party will fully support the passage of the Act through Parliament, rather than just saying that she would. You know, she seemed to be making a broader statement of party policy there. I'm not, I mean, I don't know her position within the Labour Party or her seniority or so forth, but it sounded very encouraging to me. That was all I wanted to say.
Brilliant, thank you, Oisín. Yeah, I think you had mentioned that to some of us before, but yes, it's really good to hear that there may be some kind of talks being had and conversations being had within those parties already, before we're even kind of putting a little bit of pressure on. Mike, you've got your hand up there. Would you like to come in?
Sorry, yeah. Two things. One that Rebecca Long-Bailey replied to me in Irish, which I thought was very encouraging. But the other thing was about the website. I can't remember. I was just trying to find it then. Sorry. There's a website which you can identify the number of Irish citizens within each electoral ward. I just think just putting some data in to show that you know that this isn't a far-flung issue, you know, that it is a relevant issue to local people might be useful to include in the letter. So if you could share that website, or I'll try and find it again, that might be a useful thing to add.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'll have a wee look for that as well. Mike, can see if I can include that, because that would be good information to just make the case. Well, thank you very much. Has anybody else got anything that they'd like to add? Okay. Oh, Mike, you still have your hand up, I think, from before, do you? You haven't done that again? Okay.
I can't get it down, sorry.
That's all right, no problem. Okay, well, that looks to be all the questions and comments, and thank you all very much for taking part this evening. Oh, sorry, I do have one or two more in the chat here, actually. Here's Bez from Message to Margaret. I agree with garnering support from Irish Press over here. They add a profile to our case that would never have received without it. We had to run a counter-narrative to the politicalisation, I can't say that word, of our use of the Irish language, ran our campaign on the basis of human rights and linguistic freedoms, and that is kind of the focus that we'll try and take as well. And that's, you know, Message to Margaret campaign have had great success with taking that as the frame of reference for the campaign for Margaret's grave, and their experience is going to be vital in kind of helping us do something similar now on the basis of human rights and linguistic freedoms, as you say, Bez. Rory, you've just sent us Irish and Britain's map. That's brilliant. Thank you very much for sending that to us. So that's where we'll be able to find the data for citizens in each ward who are Irish. So brilliant. Thank you very much. I think we'll draw to a bit of a close now. I just want to say a big thank you to Crother and to Linda particularly for speaking, for coming in and giving us a bit of a background and some different perspectives as well on the Irish language in the North. I also want to thank the organisations involved in making this event tonight and the rest of the campaign happen. So Conor na Gaeilge London, Conor na Gaeilge Glasgow, Margaret Keane's family and Caroline Brogan, and Conor na Gaeilge Liverpool as well, along with the other Irish language groups and interest groups in Britain who have shared the different things that we've put out on social media and have been supportive and got in touch with us to say that they're in support of what we're doing. I just want to say Bawar and pleasure to and Ihe Shaw Rooney live. It's been a real pleasure to share this evening with you. Thank you very much for coming and for lending your support to this campaign. Keep an eye out for my email. I'll send around all the information that I talked about earlier. We'll have maybe another think about the different couple of things that we'll do over the next couple of weeks, and we've had some pretty inspired ideas here tonight, so we'll definitely start some more conversations around those with the people involved. Crother's got something final to say for us, I think.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say thank you. I thought the meeting was very useful tonight, and it would be important for us to follow up on some of them. Even one thing I noticed Nell put in the I think it's Just Get Virgin Media given for the charity that Linda and níos na Seoladh. I think one of the best things that they did was, despite all the stuff that was going on online, that they promoted this link that you can donate to níos na Seoladh, and it's just for anyone in the link, and it's a good idea and something they probably should contribute to if possible.
Yeah, and actually on that as well, Crother, so there's that link that Neil has put in the chat earlier with the níos skull that Linda has been involved in setting up, so we were able to go and donate to that. I stick that in the email as well. And Dram Jarg are also doing a campaign at the minute for housing rights. So I think that's probably important to mention as well.
Yeah, well, there is two. And our one is around Acht Gaeilge is taking an Irish language strategy, or taking a court case for an Irish language strategy to be implemented that was promised in Good Friday Agreement. And another charity called the PPR are taking a court case in relation to social housing. So the Dram Jarg and NIMS have teamed up together to support both campaigns. So yeah, that's a hugely important one too.
Yeah, so I'll put links and bits of information about those various campaigns in the email that goes out as well, just so that you are informed of what's going on and how you can lend your support to those other various campaigns that are also related to the Irish language. Everything's connected. So so I think all that remains for me to say is thank you all very much for coming. It's been really brilliant to see there's 41 of us here tonight, which is fantastic for a group of people speaking Irish or interested in Irish in Britain. I'm really, really proud that we've managed to bring you all together this evening. And yeah, keep an eye out for some more communications coming, and we'll be in touch. All right.
Thank you. That was lovely. Really enjoyed that. So good. And thank you for promoting the níos goal too. That was lovely. If Crockery's away, I didn't get the chance to thank him there. So here, just more. Just, you know.
Linda, should we keep you up to date?
Yes, please do. Please do.
Yeah.
But as I say, I met with Brandon a couple of days ago too, and he was very, very positive.
Yes, yeah, I saw some of that on Twitter.
It's going to be okay, I think.
Brilliant. Good. Well, we'll make sure that the pressure's on from this side as well, just to add that little bit of extra.
Ihawaii, how are you? Ihawaii.
All right. Ihawaii, Grammy Lamaga, Pasig Chat.
Rinty, sorry job. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Grandmaga Plana.
Be me a jagball at Gandout.
Yeah, be to níos moille Johnny again.
Yeah, Glorla Johnny. Yeah. So yeah, chi me shiv. Ihawaii.
Alana Grandmaga. Okay, I haven't been you gulnas. Rwyt ti sas y glwrna Grandmaga as ik chat stack nara Tháinig me amach bhí me idirlín na gul aithnacht just ag Jerry and Imeacht
sin car galore like tá sé bhhad níos éasca agus birch an chun rudí stúrú mar sin so Tacaíocht de Tacaíocht an acht sin
Tacaíocht tech. Yeah, agus thuéis sé amach ar YouTube tá sé actually